might seem a strange place to start a documentary about World War I, Nationalist Derry, in the First World War. But this is 6 Kerry Gardens, right in the heart of the Craigan Estate. It's been one of the most staunch Republican households in the Craigan area. We look around here, we'll be able to see there's plaques to Michael Collins, the hunger strikers, and the mammy of the house, God mercy and dead now, Margaret, was an ex-Republican prisoner in Armagh jail, and the father, Alan Patton, he was a blanket man in the Heights blocks along Cash. Now, 1994, I was standing here and I was doing a degree in peace studies at McGee University, struggling big time to try and find a subject for a master's thesis. And in the middle of the degree we were asked then, would we like to go to Mons in Belgium and NATO headquarters in Brussels in Belgium as part of our peace and conflict resolution course. I remember the IRA ceasefire wasn't called until 1994 August. This was before it, so the British Army were still going up and down that street. There was still conflict going on. Well, anyway, in the middle of conversation with my mother-in-law, her and her sister were sitting here, and I think they'd been just back from visiting some prisoners, and they said to me, "Oh, Belgium," says I think our grandfather's buried over there. I said, "What?" That's the first day I'd ever heard it. I said, "Your grandfather's buried over there?" I said, "If he's anything about him, you know anything, I'll do some research. Maybe I might even, if he's lucky enough to have a grave, I'll go visit it." So they went up into their attic, and they brought down this. It was an old medal awarding certificate, and it gave me the information that I needed. On it says, "I am directed to transmit to you the accompanying 1914-15 star, which would have been conferred on Private 2317 J.J. Dover, John James Dover, Royal Irish Regiment, etc., etc." So that's what I needed there. Now, it's before partition, so it was actually from Cork, but it was the information that I needed, his number, his regiment and that. So a quick letter to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and came back a letter then to me, if you can see here, dated 20th of April 1994, with the news that indeed Private John James Dover did have a grave. It wasn't in Belgium, but it was in a place called Luz-en-Guil in France, which is outside of Lens, which itself is outside of the major city of Lille. So, within a few weeks, me and my friend from McGee, Damien McGuire, found ourselves standing after a long journey in northern France. There's Damien and there's myself at the graves, probably the first visitors ever to these Derry men. And beside him was buried a fella called Dan Kerr from Deanery Street, and we couldn't believe it, the cemetery was actually called St Patrick's Cemetery. I thought it was very appropriate. It was a very moving experience, and there's been a lot of visitors to these graves since, but this was the first time, and that was in May 1994. Now, it turns out that John James Dover was actually a relative of another person on our course on the degree, who was Jerry Dover, who then became the mayor of Derry. And here we have a picture here, a family picture, and it shows you, there's John James Dover standing. He's the bigger brother, and he's looking after the younger brother, Wooly Dover. Now, in August 1916, during a night raid, John James Dover was killed. Wooly Dover was injured. Young Dan Kerr from the Brandyville was killed. Charles Dover from Donegal was killed, and they're buried together in a row of graves, St Patrick's Cemetery, Luz-en-Guil, northern France. Now, that sent me with a historian's mind. Why are they there? Oh, there must be a story behind these men lying in this graveyard in France. And I started doing the research. What I encountered then was a fantastic, to me, a very interesting story. It was a story about a group of men, 300 strong, who were associated with the Irish National Volunteers here in Derry. And after John Redmond, their leader, and Joe Devlin, asked them in October 1914, John Redmond, his famous Wooden Bridge speech, asked the Irish volunteers to go and fight in France, that would protect Ireland's claim for home rule. And what was home rule? What was this? Home rule for Ireland was what every Irish nationalist, most Irish nationalists, desired. Unionists were terribly afraid of it. In fact, Unionists thought if home rule came to Derry, this is what Governor Walker might look like, and the apprentice boys, all the Irish nationalists that would do away with the war of life. So they were bitterly against it, and the UVF and the Protestants from Derry went off to fight, hoping to prevent home rule. The Irish Catholics, these nationalist men that I'm just telling you there now, John Zubber was one of, were going off to fight to protect home rule so that it would be there for them when they came back. So somebody somewhere along the line was going to be disappointed. Now, is there a recruiting? It's actually from the Derry Journal. Now, it's not unique to the Derry Journal because it was in all the Irish papers, but this one was in, and it was enticing the men in as well. All the different allowances. Your family will be looked after, separation allowance for your wife, depending on how many children you had, etc. But these men then were encouraged by a man called Charles O'Neill, who was a very, very prominent figure in Derry nationalist circles, for Charles O'Neill to join as a unit. Charles O'Neill, who was one of the leaders of Irish National Volunteers, said that all the men were going off and Derry wasn't getting the credit for these men, so they would join as a unit. So they were then asked to come and enlist en masse into the 16th Irish Division, the Irish Brigade of the Irish Division, and they were to enlist at St Colum's Hall in Derry. Not Everton Barracks, at St Colum's Hall. Now, these men, prior to that, would have been the Irish Volunteers. They would have done route marches all out around the back hills and up the back of the waterside and down around Chantal and out the back of Rosemount and that. If you notice in this picture here, the lazy RIC men there, they're sitting on a horse following them behind to get information. This picture isn't actually of Derry, we don't have any, but this is the same volunteers up around Castlewellan and County Down. But when Redmond asked them to go and fight, it split the volunteer movement, and this, you need to be crystal clear about this. There was a small minority split away, and in Derry, the whole of the county, maybe less than 100, and they became the Irish Volunteers. These were the men that would go on then to stage the Easter Rising, and the Irish National Volunteers would be the vast majority. And the majority would go with Redmond, go off to fight in France, and that minority, the Irish Volunteers, they were the boys, IRB inspired, that would then stage the Easter Rising in 1916. So the story moves on from here. We're here in the Northern Road, and the reason we're here in the Northern Road is people might say to themselves, well, who came up with this idea of all Irish National Volunteers joining up together? Well, the man that came up with the idea was a man called Charles O'Neill. He was one of the most famous Catholic and wealthiest Catholic people in the city. That's Charles O'Neill here. And he lived in here in a magnificent big house called Ardoin. And Charles O'Neill was the president of the Irish National Volunteers. Ardent Irish nationalist, ardent Catholic. Now, he came up with the idea that they should all join together and Derry should get the credit for these Irishmen going to fight for small nations. Now, he lived here in a huge townhouse called Ardoin. It then became the Ardoin Hotel. It was called Ardoin, Owen's Hill, Owen's, because he was a direct descendant of the chieftain Owen Roe O'Neill. And it's ironic to think it was Irish Republicans that destroyed this fine house when it was the Ardoin Hotel in the early 1970s. Also, like to bring up while we're here, that this war, the First World War, just didn't affect the poor people from the Bogside and the Brandywell and from the artisans and the people, the workers from Edenmore Street. It affected all stratums of society, men, women, rich, poor, and a lot of the officers would have came from up here in Lawrence Hill and Northern Road and big houses. Behind us we have Asylum Road, where the asylum used to be, and research of mine shows that a lot of these people ended up in the asylum, shell shock, all different things. And of course this is where we have the brew as well. And the research in the 1930s I've done, Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter who you were, how many medals you had, a lot of them ended up on Social Security and ended up signing on the brew and getting whatever they could. And People thought it was a sad end for men that had risked their lives and died, and they ended up and they had nothing. And in many ways it's a sad story. Why are we here at St Eugenius? Well, at St Eugenius Cathedral, there was a huge Catholic influence on these men. The faith was very strong for them. Maybe in 2015, 2016, we wouldn't understand how strong the faith was, how much control there was of the Catholic population by the church. And the church was fully supportive of these men going off to fight for the rights of small nations, to fight for Catholic Belgium. They were getting told stories that there were nuns getting ripped, and they were getting told that there was Catholic churches getting bombed, and this was coming first hand. This was before you had mobile phones and Google and Facebook. This was priests that had been there at Louvain, places in France, were able to bring back first hand knowledge that there was atrocities happening in Belgium. So the men, before they marched off to war, they marched here, they came here and they celebrated Mass, and they were given Holy Communion, and the Bishop McHugh, told them that he would collect scapulars and holy medals and that there, and he actually presented them. They were all presented with scapulars. I don't know if these are not of the Catholic faith, might know it, but you put these around your neck, and that is supposed to protect you from all harm. So it must have been special to these men. They have these here, and whenever you see people's effects dead coming back from the war, you'll find that scapulars and that were amongst them, along with prayer books and other items of their own personal possessions. And so it's really hard to imagine, but Derry was as much caught up in war fever as what anywhere else was. This was, oh, what a lovely war, and these men came out here, and the crowds were thronging in the streets, and there was bands playing, and they got on the military formation, and then they were to walk down the Waterloo Place to where their headquarters was, reform again, and then march off the war over at the railway station, taking them to Dublin. I mean, imagine it in your mind's eye. Crowds, flags waving, cheering. It's jingoism's the name that they give it. War fever, jingoism. Everybody thought it was a great and glorious thing, except for some of the old hands that had experienced the Boer War and knew that there was nothing glorious about war at all. You let me know whenever you want me to start speaking. I'll see what I want to come out actually does come out.
Go ahead then.
So the men left St Eugenius Cathedral. This is December 1914, just before Christmas. 300 men strong, heading off to war. And unbelievable, it's like a big carnival. They marched down William Street, they came through, came down here. Their headquarters were at the United Irish League Hall here in Waterloo Street. And before they joined up at all, that's where the initial idea and the meeting took place, was for the Irish Brigade. Anybody from the Irish National Volunteers, Irish Volunteers wanted to join up, to come along to meeting up here at the United Irish League Hall. And so many of them turned up. And that's where they joined up. That's where they first decided to join up and put their name down. This is a very special place for the men of the First World War, because the night before that they went to St Eugenius for to have the Mass, they had a monster feed in here. They were feeded and fed, all at the expense of Charles O'Neill. Remember Charles O'Neill, the leading Catholic, one of the richest in Derry? He provided a 4-course lunch for them, 4-course dinner for them in here, and there was all. It ended up with them singing "A Nation Once Again." It was a very patriotic Irish thing. Now we have the memorial windows here, which are one of the only memorials to the 16th Irish Division and the Irish Brigade in the island of Ireland. And people find it very unusual that it's in what was known as the Unionist citadel of the Guildhall. Once again, they were blew up in the 1970s with a bomb as well. This is the news report from the Derry Journal about the big feed and the men at the Guildhall. Next day they went to St Eugenius for Mass and then marched to the railway station to go off the wire. Now here's a wee report from it. I'll read it out for you. It says, for the Irish Brigade, Derry's first contingent, over 250 for the 16th Division, farewell supper. Probably the last supper. Last night there was given on the Guildhall a farewell supper to those joining the Irish Brigade from the city. The entertainment was held in the Assembly Hall, and large as the spacious apartment is, it was taxed to its utmost capacity. In fact, there were quite a number who were unable to be accommodated. It's only a few days since the idea was put into operation that Derry's contribution to the army should be organised so that the city and country of their origin should get the credit, instead of their being allowed to go individually. Mr. Charles O'Neill, DL, with commendable promptitude, acting on this idea, called a meeting some days ago in the United Irish League Hall, Waterloo Street, and there was a significant response. Since that time, recruits have continuously came forward, culminating in the large and enthusiastic assemblage which was gathered last night. Grace having been said by Reverend McFeely, the chairman said that before he mentioned with reference to the purpose of their gathering, he would read the apologies he had received from his Lordship, Most Reverend Dr. McHugh had written him as follows. Dear Mr. O'Neill, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter announcing that the departure on Friday next of 160 Derry boys belonging to the local body of the Irish National Volunteers to join the Irish Brigade in Fermoy. Taking such a deep interest as you do in what is rightly considered a critical juncture in the affairs of Ireland, no less than of the Empire, it must have been very gratifying for you to find so many of your nationalist fellow citizens come forward of their own free choice. This wasn't conscription. Of their own free choice and volunteer to share in vindicating the cause of justice and Christian civilization. Not to talk of the national interests that are at stake. It is much to be regretted that action was not taken sooner to keep the Derry National Volunteers together, and not have been scattered as they are over several regiments, thus depriving Derry of the credit that is her due. Had this been done, the number joining the Irish Brigade on Friday would probably have been trebled, while it is well known that the Derry reservists at the front or on the way to it could be counted by hundreds. Please convey to these courageous and patriotic young men at the supper you are so generously providing for them tomorrow night that I am procuring beads and scapulars which will be given to them at 9 o'clock Mass in the Cathedral on Friday morning, and that my earnest prayer is that victory may crown their efforts, and that they may all return again to Derry in health and vigour when they have helped to give the quietus to military despotism. I am sincerely yours, Charles McHugh. There was loud and prolonged applause. Then there was another letter from Longtower, letters from everybody. These men were patted in the back, feeded, fed, sent off. They were. They were feeded and fed on the Guildhall. Bellies fed, had a great night, very patriotic. Speeches by anybody who was anybody, including the bishop, and wishing them well. And the nation once again, they went to Mass in the Cathedral, they got their scapulars, so they're prepared religiously, they're fed. The crowds are thronging the streets, down past Waterloo police on horseback, bands of Royal Enlistment Fusiliers, and they march over here. This is December 1914, just before Christmas. And they march over here and they're going to the Midland Railway Station at Foyle Road, which took you on the train to Dublin. Over there was more enthusiastic than it was along the way, but we'll get that later. They jump forward this very same street in 1919 when the men came back, or the men that were lucky enough to come back. They were told then that Ireland was going to be partitioned, and they were deaf against this. So in August, or Ladies' Day, August the 15th, 1915, there was the biggest demonstration probably ever witnessed in Derry of Catholic and nationalist rights. Sinn Féin, the Irish Nationalist Veterans, the AOH, all the different Catholics, the bands from all over, and they created a monster demonstration, and it was to oppose partition.
And as part of the deal, they were saying, if the apprentice boys can march up and around the walls on the 12th of August, then we should be able to march up around the walls on the 15th of August. But no, the authorities says no, you can march all around the town you like, but you're not getting up on the walls. And the Dorset Regiment, the Irish Catholic nationalist population at that time would have been like the paratroopers today. They would have been detested. They didn't like them at all, the Dorset Regiment. Far from them being your comrades that you fought in a war for. No, these people were disliked over the bogside, the doors. And it was them with machine gun posts, military footing, and sandbags preventing this march from getting up on the walls. Now, it was a saying that everybody that marched on that marched, but here's a wee quote from it. It says that at the march there was the most harmonious coalescing of all the Catholic forces in the city, and congratulations were extended to the magnificent size of the gathering and the grand evidence it afforded of cohesion and unity in insertion of Catholic rights. The Hibernians and Sinn Féin both made a fine turnout, but by far the most significant thing in the day's proceedings was the march of the nationalist veterans of the city. Over 1,000 demobilised men marched with soldierly bearing, and at the head of the section there were a number of soldiers and sailors in uniform sporting green favours. At the head of the veterans was carried a great white banner with the inscription, Irish National Veterans Association, we fought for the rights of small nations, Ireland and nation. Just behind me is Edmonton Barracks. Edmonton Barracks had a huge role in World War I, huge military role right up until what? Till the end of the troubles here in Derry. And during World War I, there was stationed over there was a man called Francis Ledwidge. They called him the Blackbird of Slane. This man was Ireland's answer to Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, writing about war and poetry. Some of his best poetry was written here in Derry. And he was friends with Thomas MacDonagh and all the men of the Easter Rising. It was very sad when they heard about it. And he wrote some poetry here along the Fahan side and that. And there was always saying that he always had an eye for the women. Well, when I was doing research, he actually had his poetry published here by Lord Dunsany, who lived out at Government House out the line there, the Letterkenny Road. And his housekeeper, his daughter, was telling us that yes, Francis Ledwidge, that's true about him, had a night for women. She was saying that he was always chasing after her mother. And now Francis Ledwidge lies buried in Belgium as well. So it's another wee connection with Irish nationalism and Easter 1916 and Derry. Foyle Street, the men marched along and off they were. The Catholic nationalist veteran, the nationalists, men, according to people in Derry, they probably think that the 36th Ulster Division, the Unionists, actually were the only people who went and fought the war and actually won the war. We've got a huge story of the nationalist veterans here going off to fight for the rights of small nation. And there was 1,000 of them here marched in 1919, wanted to get up on the walls. Dorset presented them. And they marched across here with a big banner saying, Irish Nationalist Veterans Association, we fought for the rights of small nations, Ireland the nation. I mean, they weren't marching with a Union Jack and God Save Our King or something, and we're proud to be British. I mean, there's a huge green nationalist dimension to this story, and it's been forgotten. I call them the forgotten army. Men marched over here, heading off the war just before December 1914. Crowds thronging the streets, war fever, jingoism, bands playing, Irish National Volunteers marching with their rifles, and Enniskillen Fusiliers with their rifles marching alongside them. Over here to the railway station, which would have taken them off to Dublin. Stayed overnight in Dublin and then Cork. The news report says that they couldn't even get moving off the platform. There was that many people and dignitaries, and they were given cigarettes and the bands were playing everything. And as the train was pulling out, there was all these bangers along the line, so it was all, you know, like a firework display as they were pulling out. And I mean, it was as if they were going to some kind of fun fair or carnival or something. It's really unimaginable when you think of the horrors that they were going off to. This would have been the last view of Derry a lot of these men would have seen. Others would have got home and leave and would have seen it again. Many of them's buried there now in their lonely graves in France. Many of them don't even have a grave. But they left here and they left in this train, I can tell you. It was off to a lovely war. It'll be over by Christmas. And the men were actually getting upset that maybe it'll be over before we get there. We won't even get a chance to do any fighting. I mean, in hindsight, looking back, it's actually sad in a way, you know. Really is no glory in war, is there at all? But that's how it turned out. A news report here. The big batch of Nationalists, they enlisted at St Colum's Hall. Symbolically, it was a huge thing. It was a Catholic hall. It was a statement that they were Catholic, they were Irish, they were Nationalists. It wasn't a British Army barracks. Big batch of Nationalists enlisted, large muster of Irish National Volunteers proceeded to St Colum's Hall, Derry on Saturday evening and offered themselves for service with the Irish Brigade, which has now been formed at Fervor. That's in Cork. By arrangement with the military authorities, medical staff and other officers were in attendance for medical examination and attestation. But although these were kept extremely busy all evening, it was found impractical to deal with all who presented themselves, and the attestations will be resumed today. It is understood that 170 recruits were accepted. The proportion of rejections was small, being principally on account of the youth of the applicants. This was young boys all caught up in excitement, all trying to get away in it too. There had to be witnesses and had to be signed in. What height you were, what age you were swear allegiance to the crown and whatever. And once that was done then, that was you signed in, you were then a member of the Irish Brigade of the 16th Irish Division. Very nationalist in outlook. And their leader, the captain in charge of them, was Wally Redmond, who was John Redmond then, John Redmond, Irish Parliamentary Party, their leader. Unionists revere the memory of the Somme. I mean, no wonder like the many men died from the year 120 and the first day of the Battle of Somme, and sort of in the psyche of unionism and Ulster loyalism and Protestantism, especially here in the Fountain. To this very day now, with the 100th anniversary, it'll be honoured, revered, and the men will be cherished, treasured, remembered. And the men on the Bogside and the Brandywell, Waterside, Bishop Street, basically were forgotten all about, like. So it's sort of part of their history that it's been forgotten. Why, I don't know, but maybe it just didn't suit the agenda. After they came back and Ireland was partitioned, and sort of when they went off to the war, you see, one was going to have to fight for home rule and the other was going to have to fight against it, and somebody was going to lose. So the men from Derry, the Bogside and that, came back and their country was partitioned, and they resented this. They think they'd been stuck up big time, and it's easy to feel why. After the First World War, it was rumoured that maybe there was upwards of 40,000 Irish people died in the war. That's disputed now, maybe 35. Some people said now it's going right down to 25, 27, 28. Well, anyway, they made a big massive memorial volumes with everybody's name on it individually. Every one of the names, very ornate Celtic decorations. 100 copies of these memorial volumes were made, and the copy in Derry happens to be in here in St Colum's Cathedral, the Protestant cathedral. And for many years, I couldn't tell you how many families have told me that it was like an into enemy territory, sneaking up on this St Colum's Cathedral to have a wee look at their grandfather, their father's names on these memorial volumes. War ended in 1918, and like most other towns and cities throughout Europe, it was decided in this city here to build a fine memorial, a monument to the men that died. Now, this monument actually wasn't opened then until 1927, so roughly 10 years after the war ended. It was erected by public subscription, so that meant that everybody and anybody, all classes, all religions, and this is there. So it truly is a people's memorial. So it belongs to the people of Derry, nobody one group in particular. Now the man that was chosen to design it was called Vernon Murch, very famous sculptor, and there was a bit of controversy about this because if you can see up here this soldier here with a binnet, it's one of the few memorials in the world even where it shows you one human being probably killing another human being with a binnet down, and people resented that. The Derry Journal in the 1930s was saying it was a grotesque memorial. But recent researcher Trevor Temple on here in the Fountain, he suggests that the evidence is that Vernon Murch wanted this binneting of the soldier to expose the horrors of war, to show that war was a horrible thing, not that it was a great and glorious thing in that. As you probably see, most other war memorials have a soldier standing in sombre remembrance or laurel wreaths in it. There's 756 names on the war memorial. There should be over 1,000. There was a whole process to get on it. Did you live in the city? Did you come to live in the city when you were younger? What relationship do you have with the city? So there's people on it that shouldn't be on it. There's lots of people that should be on it that aren't on it. There's one lady on it, Laura Gailey, a nurse. There's one clergyman, a Protestant clergyman from down the Strand Road. And roughly 50% of the names are Protestant and 50% Catholic. Give or take a few here, maybe 46 Catholic, 56. But I don't like getting into this, but there's a huge distortion of that proportion because on the 1st of July 1916, over 100 men from the UVF in this city were killed in the one day at the Battle of Somme. So that 100 killed in that day sort of distorts the proportion of the people on the war memorial. And it's obvious from all the records that have been checked on that because Derry had a Catholic minority, because Catholic men were more likely to join the army, that there was actually far more Catholics from Derry, nationalists, that served in the First World War than maybe from the Unionist community. The last name in this memorial is a man from Rosemount, Tommy Young. He was a Lance Sergeant, so he was well up at himself, and he was in the Irish Brigade in the Irish Division. And Tommy Young is the last name in this memorial, and his grandson John Young is the last name on the Bloody Sunday memorial just down here in the bogside of those that died on that day, Bloody Sunday, the last on that. So it's a sweet connection between the war memorials. If you were to dishonour and attack this war memorial, you're attacking Tommy Young, and if you were to do the same down there, it would be John Young. You know, there's so many connections between the community, between the memorials. Upwards of over, I would say, more than 1,000 men from the Bogside, Brandywell, Bishop Street area, plus another 500-600 from the waterside and other areas of Derry. Nationalist Catholics fighting in the First World War. Now, people might say, well, when they were over there in the trenches, what was their politics? What political outlook had they? And look, there's an idea there. An appeal from the trenches. That's a man here from St Colum's, Wales. There's St Colum's, Wales there. The old St Colum's, Wales. And they're saying, do not partition Ireland. You want me to read it here? Private J.M., I can't say his name because he'd get arrested, of the Irish Brigade who belongs to St Colum's, Wales. And who was one of the first members of the Irish National Volunteers when the organisation was established in the city. The organisation was established in the city. Is writing also on the question, the suggested settlement of the Irish question. 1916, after the Easter Rising, there was proposals from Lord George in that they partition Ireland. And he says, in expressing the opinion of over 1,200 Derrymen in the trenches, He does not consider it just or expedient for anyone to force the proposals on the people of Derry, partition. He thinks that the men belonging to the city or in the firing line are entitled to have a voice in the matter, and he suggests it would be much better to leave the question to one side until the boys come home again. It would, he says, be a sorry reward for those of us who would return to our beloved Derry to find that while we were out here doing our bit in this great world conflict to preserve the territorial integrity and national unity of Belgium and all our small states, our position in a united Ireland has been sacrificed. Out here, where a common cause has brought us all together in a spirit of friendship, we are unanimous in the view that it would be an outrage to split up our country. And we feel that any such disastrous step be now taken by those whom we have left behind us, it could never be retraced. In heaven's name, we appeal to Derry men at home to save Ireland from the dishonour of splitting up our native land. The story of these men that left Derry, the Irish National Volunteers, and joined the Irish Brigade, the Irish Division, and went to fight in France. If there was one individual that really epitomised and told the story, then it would have to be James Downey. James Downey was a young man. He was an Irish volunteer. Whenever they split, he became an Irish National Volunteer. He responded to Redmond. He went along with the other 300 up at St Colum's Hall. He went to fight in France in the Irish Brigade. James Downey's family have a lot of stuff belonging to him. It shows you his battalion of the Irish Volunteers parading in 1914 down in the cattle market in Roswell Street in the Bogside. Then he joined up and he went off with the men to Cork and France and Fermoy. And the family says that whenever they came home and leave from Cork, they always brought bullets, grenades, ammunition, anything that might be useful to the Irish struggle if it came to a fight with the UVF later after the war. And James then went with the men to fight in France. He was in France and he got injured. And I don't know, because the War Diary says that day there was a training accident with a grenade and there was a shell with the Germans. So he was injured with a shell with one or the other. He was shipped back to Guildford in Surrey, in England. And there was an exchange of telegrams from the nurse in Guildford in Surrey to his wife in the Bogside, St Patrick Street, just off where my granddad lived in Howard Street. And it says, look, it's grand, don't worry, it's a minor operation and he'll be right as rain soon. Next thing, there was a flurry of telegrams saying, sorry, things just didn't go the way it was expected. He took a bad turn, an embolism or something, and he died. And then there was an exchange saying, do you want him to be buried over in Surrey, or would you like his body to be brought home for a funeral here in Derry? And the family requested to be brought home for a funeral here in Derry. So even though it looks as if this was a soldier that fought in the First World War and that there, this man was actually an Irish National Volunteer, very proud, very senior member of it. He died and he was what? 23 years of age in July 1916. Nowhere in Derry does it manifest itself, the split in Irish nationalism, as at these two graves here. Also, the irony, some people think, is that James McGlinchey, commander of the Irish National Volunteers, and James Keenan had both been in the British Army. James Keenan had been a World War I veteran. Now, remember I was telling you about the split, about the Irish Volunteers went on to stage Easter Rising, small minority. James McGlinchey specifically says Irish National Volunteers. After the split, the men that stayed with Redmond were the National Volunteers. So James McGlinchey, in charge of the thing. Now, James McGlinchey was the commander of James Downey. Now, James Downey's got a British Army headstone. Yet James Downey was a very prominent Irish National Volunteer, very patriotic Irishman that went off to fight in the war and brought home ammunition, grenades and that for future use in the thing. And was a very proud member of the Irish Volunteers before the split and before they went off to war. Down behind me here in the Protestant section, I mean, every second grave's got on it's got to my darling son that was killed in the First World War, to my husband that died at the Somme, and that all over, all, you know, and the Protestant Unionist section maybe of the cemetery. And it was very rare to see anything like that in the Catholic section of the cemetery, the Irish Catholic Nationalist section of the cemetery. And in recent years now, you see here Private Patrick Doherty, one of these men we're dealing with, that joined up at St Colum's Hall, and there he is commemorated here. He was a very patriotic Irishman too, Irish National Volunteer from Osborne Street in Rosemount. And see the bit of Gaelic script there now, and then there's another one of the men, McFredericks, is up here. He's commemorated in a modern headstone now. So it's sort of to me, it's showing that there's the people, Derry, the Bogside, are starting to regain a wee bit of sense of pride in these men, and realising that what they did was a very honourable thing at a very, very difficult time in history when the whole world was at stake. You heard the bishop saying, you're not only going out to fight for Ireland, you're going out to fight for Christian civilization, and you're going to fight for the rights of small nations. Men from our small wee town here, the Brandywell, the Bogside, Bishop Street, and the men from the top of Hull on the water side too. They get forgotten. They were called the St Patrick's Battalion.